Just want to remind you guys, this episode is presented by PrizePicks. Download the app today. Use the code JUICE to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Bring the Juice. So, guys, we are continuing right along with our good friend Alex from Hail Mary Sports. We're going to continue on the offensive side of the ball today, and we're going to talk about the offensive line. And I know that's a pretty broad one, Alex, but we don't really know what the Colts are going to do at either guard or tackle. We don't know what their focus is going to be, right? Because on one hand, you know, the Colts lost Will Fries, their starting guard from last year. But could a guy like Matt Gonsalves, who they drafted last year, potentially slide down to guard? And if he does that, then it begs the question at right tackle next year with Braden Smith being on the final year of his contract. So I thought we'd just talk about both. In the case of whatever scenario does happen, these would be the players the Colts would likely target. So, Alex, let's start, though, if you're good with this, let's start with tackle, because I think that's kind of there's a lot of guys here that could potentially be available for the Colts at 14. And, you know, I think a lot of people would say I'd rather focus on a tackle than a guard, especially because, you know, you drafted Quentin Nelson in 2018 pretty high. So when moving and looking at, you know, the tackles here, potentially round one tackles for you, whether it's 14, trade back, somewhere in the first round, who are some guys you think might be available here for the Colts that might make some sense if they're looking to potentially get their tackle of the future?
Yeah, so the dream option is going to be Armand Membu. Highly doubt he's going to get here. Like, emphasis on the highly part, just too athletic, too high ceiling. But he's someone who also could fill in that guard short term, especially with Smith on the last year of the deal. He's the dream offensive line pick for y'all. He also needs a bit more development, but hyper athletic, fits a lot with what you guys are doing in terms of when you drafted Gonsalves, when you drafted Bortolini. Looks like the athletic profile makes a ton of sense. The other one that I'll throw in that I believe would be great via a trade back would be Josh Simmons, who he's right now recovering from a patellar tendon tear, but when he was healthy, was the best offensive lineman in the class. To me, I wouldn't have been surprised to see him go number one overall at a portion of the year. And he also has right tackle experience. Granted, it was 2 years ago, 2022 technically, so 3 years ago. But still, he actually didn't do too well at right tackle, but that's because he was at San Diego State while he was still putting together all of his overall mechanics that I think he ended up finally putting together this year. So good to see him there. And then he ended up at Ohio State's Pro Day doing an excellent job with showing his mobility just a couple months after that tear, which is unheard of. So he's recovering fast, which is awesome. And on top of that, he has that right tackle experience. Worst case scenario, I actually thought that, I said in my initial evaluation, he's a blue chip tackle, potentially Hall of Fame guard. Like, I'm an absolute fiend for this guy. But I mean, if you, because of the patellar tendon tear, can trade back and still get him, honestly, I absolutely adore that. The other name that I will toss into this equation, because I'm like, there's not many that I think would be tackles at that point. You could try to move Kelvin Banks eventually if you really want to. Same thing with Will Campbell. It's just it doesn't feel like that's the right move because that's not in their pedigree. And then again, you'd be drafting them to be guards in the short run at the very minimum, unless Braden Smith hits another mental wall.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. So, okay, those are some first-round guys there at tackle. Who would be some guys maybe at guard that you think would make some sense there early for Indianapolis as well in the first round? If probably likely a trade-down scenario here, but you know, who would be some guys that you potentially could see the Colts taking a chance on here or taking that with their first pick?
Yeah, and I think that this is pretty telling based on how you drafted last year. I'm really going to be focusing on the athletic profile of the offensive guard. And Gray Zabel is the dream. To me, he's a top 10 player in the class. I have him at number 8 overall, and that includes you guys with season-ending injuries above him that probably Post would not. So to me, I think Gray Zabel is just a superstar. In Mobile, he was probably the best player there as well. And we've gotten prospect fatigue because he's here in North Dakota State tackle who's not good enough to be a tackle because of his arm length. And everyone's like, oh, we're going to write him off. But this dude ended up playing center and guard at an extremely high level when he never really got a chance to do it at a high level there in the FCS. His best games were versus the top-end talent, like versus Colorado. So I love what he did. And he's an excellent choice. Granted, guards that are built like that are not overly powerful in the upper body, not usually going in the top 15. So that's something that I would say realistically should be a trade back, but something that I personally don't care too much about. The other name I'll mention here, again, probably by a trade back, would be Donovan Jackson. Donovan Jackson has had a ton of prospect fatigue. Don't understand why. This guy ended up playing first round guard play throughout pretty much his entire tenure there at Ohio State. And then it just continued ascending as time went on to where he was a lock pretty much at the end of the first based on his guard play. He ends up transitioning to tackle mid-year, first game versus Penn State. Can you imagine your first game at left tackle being against Abdul Carter? Horrible. Like, so talk about a shot to the confidence, a 0.0 pass blocking grade, like shot to the confidence. And he continued sticking with it until he ended up literally winning a national championship and being locked down as a left tackle. That flexibility is incredible. And he still is most likely looked at as a guard with a bright future as a tackle. I think he's absolutely worth potentially moving back and still selecting at that point. I'm a huge fan of his game. He's number 26 on my board.
Okay. So now moving to round 2, because we've seen the Colts find some really good guys, in rounds 2, 3, 4, in those, outside of the first round. I think Quentin Nelson's the only guy that Chris Ballard has drafted on the offensive line in the first round. So, moving on to like round 2 here for the Colts, who are some potential tackles here that could make some sense for them if they choose to go that route at pick 45 here?
Tackle's going to be a little bit light for the right tackle spot. That's my only concern. I would say the players in Mobile that I thought had some success with flexing left and right are the following. I'm a huge fan of Ozzie Trapilo out of Boston College. I think he's listed more as a round 3 to round 4 player realistically, but I actually have him as a top 20 player of mine. I think that he's phenomenal. But that's somebody who played right tackle in college at Boston College. He ended up actually showing some really good flexibility to the left tackle spot in Mobile as well. So I like that flexibility. I love his anchor. I think he's going to be a really, really good player in the NFL. But you look at someone like Ariante Urzuri as well. He's still developing. Honestly, should be a guard in the short run as he continues to work on his mechanics. But if you have to stick him at tackle, I still think he can hold up. He had some really good reps even versus Abdul Carter. The last rep of the game, to me, was the best rep he had the entire game. And so I love seeing the fact that even at the end of the game in fourth quarter situations, he's still able to produce versus the best of the best. That's someone who I have a lot of faith in, especially because he also has that guard potential. And then the last name that I'll probably toss in here for like legit tackle possibility is Anthony Belton out of NC State. He was actually up into like the 370, 380 range, and he ended up slimming down to like that 340 to 350 range there in Mobile, which is great to see. And that's not like widely public. His agent literally was telling me as I was waiting to snag a little photo and look like a midget next to him. But I mean, Anthony Belton is the definition of physicality. He's actually pretty mobile for his size as well, which is, you don't really think about mobility when you think about a mauler like that. He is actually very, very solid. And he even had right tackle reps that I thought were really, really solid there in Mobile. He's my number 65 player on my board. So if you're looking at tackles, that's where I'd go.
Okay, so let's talk about some guards then, because I feel like there still are some pretty good guards here that we've heard about. Who would be some of your guys here in round 2 for Indy?
Yeah, so round 2, I mean, it's a little bit light. I would say if you are set on Bortolini being the center for the future, avoid Jared Wilson. Jared Wilson tested out phenomenally well. I would say that he has some of the best reps out of any of the interior offensive linemen in the class, but his reps he oscillates between great and mediocre. Like, he has some reps where I'm like, brother, we know that you're better than that. But at the same time, he has some reps where like, holy shit, like this is spot on. You're mirroring the guy. You're pretty much floating on your feet. He's someone who, if you trust the development of your offensive line with your offensive line coach, he's an absolute slam dunk kind of selection, probably as a late second pick. So again, by a trade back. Another player that I would mention maybe in the second round, because I've heard some buzz where, he can end up moving up to that range. And he's a former right tackle as well. And that is Marcus Bowe, friend of the show as well. He was a guy who was considered for me a first round level tackle before he ended up measuring at 32-inch arms and, ended up proving this year that his fight style and his mobility project a little bit better to the inside. But super high motor. I mean, the guy is literally after every practice, especially in Mobile, literally working with guys he lost with in one-on-ones. So I love seeing that. But he's someone who is an absolute boxer. I thought he was a hand fighter, like a legit karate black belt, because of the fact that he just was so tactical. And so that's going to be something that, again, good physical profile, athletic, and also someone who is going to punish somebody on the other side of the offensive line. Those are going to be those second-round players. And again, tossing in Anthony Belton, Ariante Ursary into that mix as well.
As we said, guys, today's episode is sponsored by PrizePicks. Now, what is PrizePicks? PrizePicks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. Instead of battling against thousands of other players across platforms, you're basically picking 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you're choosing more or less on those stat projections to be able to watch those winnings roll in. It's very easy. Do you guys want to play along at some of PrizePicks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and UFC fighter Sugar Sean O'Malley? Well, if you guys sign up today, you can find the community plays under the promos tab of the app to view the entries of some of the biggest names on the platform and be a part of that as well. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000 just like that with NBA, NHL, and college basketball entries today on PrizePicks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. Like a lot of other things, guys, they also offer injury insurance, so your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. So if someone exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player projection won't count against you and the rest of your entry stays live. So it's a great bounce back for that one. What I love about the app as well, guys, is it's not just sports like NBA, NHL, football, and tennis, and baseball, and all these other things, but there's also a lot of others that go into it as well. If you like to place entries on video game situations like Call of Duty, CS2, Apex, if that's something that appeals to you, there's a wide variety of sports and video games and everything else that you can place entries on. And I love how expansive it is. Even just looking at the NBA, there's entries you can make with turnovers, with points. You can do combo deals, dunks, field goals attempted, all of these different things. So there's just so many different ways to make money off of these entries. Be sure to download the app today and use the code JUICE to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup.
Awesome. Well, we already mentioned, Matt Gonzalez, Tanner Bordellini, guys in rounds 3, 4, mid-round guys here.
Right.
Who would be some guys there? Say the Colts go a similar route here, and they, maybe not necessarily a guy that starts, but maybe a guy that does challenge at right guard this year, and maybe potentially right guard, right tackle next year. Kind of like Matt Gonzalez this last year. Mm-hmm. Who would be some guys in rounds 3 and 4 for both positions, tackle and guard, that you really look at and say these could be some real big steals? This could be what everybody would say Tanner Bordellini was last year, right? A steal in the 4th round. Right. Who would be some of those guys for you that you're like, they might still be available there in rounds 3 and 4?
Yeah, so there's a couple of them. Technically, I could have tossed in Jonas Savania with the second-round options as well. He played right tackle, has that interior offensive line capability, and even played some left tackle as well. Got to give him a quick shout because I forgot to. But the names that I would end up tossing in for round 3, I'd recycle Marcus Bowe, Anthony Belton. There's a chance they're there in the 3rd round. But for new names, I would talk about Wyatt Milam, again, someone who could be a second-round pick. I'm really unsure with how people have been talking about him. It seems like he's a 3rd-round pick. But for me, he was pretty much locked a late first until the offseason, which is, again, it's kind of almost the antithesis of Jackson Dart, where Jackson Dart was, pretty much a 3rd-rounder until he stopped playing football, and then he ended up rising. This almost seems like counterintuitive, where Wyatt Milam was pretty much a 1st-round player until he ended up hurting his hand. He literally allowed 0 pressures on the year. Like, this guy has great core strength. He's really, really solid overall. Solid enough movement skills. My only issue, which is why I understand he's slipping, and it's why he slipped to 57 on my board from being in the 20s, he did look a bit more uncomfortable transitioning to the inside than I was kind of hoping. He has great core strength, so you're not going to be throwing him off you anytime soon. But there is going to be a charge up time for him to be able to grow, develop, and turn into the player that he should be. So I understand that. The other player I'd like to toss in here is Luke Kandra. I talked about him on our episode of guys who we should target. Luke Kandra he's not athletic enough, in my opinion, to be a top end option for you. So this is going to be more of if he slips to the fourth and you're just saying, we need to get a good player. Like, who gives a crap if they're going to, necessarily be the athletic profile we're looking for? The value is just there, so go and get him. That's the player that I would want. Just super good anchor, rock solid high floor, not a really high ceiling player, but at the end of the day, do you need high ceiling guards or do you just need them to do their damn job? I'd prefer to make sure they do their job. So that's the guy who I'd toss into that range. One more name I'll toss in for you. Little bonus treat. Wow. He's a right tackle, but I have a lot of faith in him as a guard. He's my number 78 player on my board. Johnny Cornelius. Super high IQ, gets beaten from wide 9 quite a bit. So that's why I think a lot of his issues kind of dissolve when he ends up going into guard. I think he's a starting level guard in the NFL, like legitimately. I know I'm very, very, I haven't heard of anybody talking about him as a guard, but I have a lot of faith in him in that category. His mobility is solid enough. And I think his IQ is through the roof. He understands and processes very, very well. And when he ended up having a tight end next to him, which I call like quasi guard reps, like he ended up showing a lot more comfortability and did not allow that same level of interior pressure where I think he was trying to mitigate for his lack of lateral mobility. And so he ended up allowing inside moves quite a bit. So I honestly think he's going to be a great guard and also has that right tackle ability.
Awesome, man. Okay, so I feel like the Colts do this about every draft too. Like they'll go draft a DB around the day 3, and they'll also go draft some sort of talented but very raw, whether that's in terms of the level of competition or whether just not enough reps. Maybe played 1 year or whatever they do. Seems like they typically find some sort of offensive lineman a little bit later. That's kind of like that project type of guy, a guy that maybe could turn into something, but you never know. And they take, as they often do under Chris Ballard, they take the chance based off the traits. So who would be some of those guys that you look there maybe day 3? I mean, heck, the Colts found Will Fries back in 2021 in the 7th round. So who could be some guys there that you like potentially on day 3 that could potentially, maybe not this year, but maybe in the future could compete for, who knows, backup guard, backup tackle, maybe even start at some point?
Yeah, so going to quickly recycle Johnny Cornelius and Luke Kandra. I think those guys are most likely going to be day 3, but ended up wanting to push them into round 3 just in case. The name that I would bring up here exclusively for day 3 is a Logan Brown. Now, I've heard people even have him into their top 50s. Those are not people who I've heard usually are representative of the league's opinion. So I would just say it feels like he's going to be a little bit more of a late day 2, early day 3 player. Very athletic tackle from Kansas. I mean, he's somebody who just pops off in terms of his movement skills. So right there with that, I think his biggest issue is his hand placement, which on the inside, a little bit less worried about that because of the fact that his athleticism can allow him, if trained right, to get in the right position to mitigate that issue. To me, he's literally a fringe day 2 player. So, I mean, I love the athletic tools there and the ability to kick into guard. I do think that, the fact he has that tackle experience as well gives you the long-term upside to be able to say, this is where I can pick and choose where I want him to be. And that flexibility comes with a little bit of a bonus in terms of the price tag. So the last guy I'll mention here, I could talk about Emory Jones, but I don't think he fits the athletic profile. When Cam Williams is healthy, if you really want to take a swing on somebody, he's notorious for being absolute butt cheeks after hurting his knee. But this guy was a bona fide first-round player until doing that. And I don't know why he came out. Zero clue. But when he ended up being completely healthy, I feel like I'm talking about Michael Williams at this point, he ended up performing way better. The mobility was still footwork's nuanced. He needs to work on that. His feet are very heavy, but he wasn't slow. He ended up really struggling when he ended up hurting his knee. And I think that leaves a lot of us with a sour taste in our mouth. So Cam Williams, I mean, the right tackle, he could kick into guard as he's continuing to learn and develop, but long arms, he's a prototypical player. And if you're looking for a long-term project, God only knows why he came out, but that's worth taking the swing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, man, I'm going to be interested to see how the Colts address it. Again, they lost two guys that started for them last year, so there definitely is a need here, and I'm curious because I think for me, I'd rather see them probably address it day 2, day 3.
Yeah.
But with Chris Ballard and his love for the trenches, I can never fully rule it out. But yeah, man, really do appreciate your time, and I know we still got a ton to talk about for the draft, but man, it's going to be it's such a fun time. I just love it. It's my favorite time of the year, I honestly think, in the NFL world. I know obviously yours because that's what you do.
Yeah.
But man, tell me just what are you most looking forward to this year in the draft, and who maybe if there's you got a lot of guys that you're focusing on, a lot of prospects.
Right.
Who is your guy that you are really curious to see where he goes?
So what I'm most excited for is honestly to see where Shedeur Sanders goes. Is it going to be the fall that we kind of expect right now? Is the buzz real? It's going to be a really big learning experience for a lot of us to understand how much smoke, how much fire is behind the smoke, right? But
sure.
That's what I'm most excited for. Now, the player who I'm most intrigued to see where he goes, probably going to be Jalen Smith. He's a corner out of USC. Love him to death. He's a top 30 player on my board. And I think that he's still so developmental, but he's physical, high motor, and he shows that he could be Andrew Phillips-esque. That's something that I really, really want to see end up working out for him. But the other name I'd probably toss in there in the sake of the offensive line episode, Armand Membu. I mean, if he goes to a spot where I just genuinely don't believe he fits into the system, if he's not able to be on the move as much, if there's not a good enough O-line coach, I think we're going to be disappointed. And maybe he's going to have to be someone that is more of a reclamation project. But no one's really talking about that. But that is going to be one of the more hot takes. I'm excited to see where he ends up.
I feel like I've just seen the Jets have been the team that a lot of people have talked about.
It's a dream.
And obviously, as a Colts fan, I would love for the Jets to take him because that rules out Tyler Warren. Now, I've seen some other, people project him to go to some of the other teams, which I don't necessarily agree with, but we'll have to see on that. Again, this isn't a tight end episode, so go check that one out. That one's already out, guys. But yeah, really do appreciate your time, Alex, and we'll have to do it again soon.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Greatly appreciate it. If you haven't already, go check out Alex's channel. And for this channel's sake, hit that like button, hit subscribe, turn on the notification bell, all that good stuff. You guys know what to do. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Thank you so much. And let me know where you guys are watching the draft from this year. But
you missed out on the timing of the outro.
Well, there we go. And I'll end it with this. That'll do it for this one, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. And as always, go Colts.
There we go.